Sadly, some who claim to follow Jesus have never eaten with his brethren. I want you to just think about that just a second. There are people who claim to follow Jesus who've never had a meal with their brethren. Not even in their home. Not at the building, not somewhere else. Never eaten with them. There are members of the church that never stay for a fellowship meal. Isn't that interesting? We having these flock meals. Now, I understand circumstances, situation, but never. There are churches that have never eaten a fellowship meal together. Isn't that strange? I understand if you got an issue about the building or something, that happens. But you should be able to find a place and eat together, right? There are even some, this is really strange, that claim to be followers of Christ that have never had communion with the brethren. Isn't that a strange thing? Never had a communion service. Never been in a communion service. So I looked at how much we spent, and so just think about it a second. In the future, this is our fellowship hall. This is it, right here. Look at what we spend on a fellowship hall. Do we believe in eating together or what? The Old Testament is filled with meals. There really are a lot of discussion about meals and how meals are connected to covenant even. Meals and their great meanings are all over the place in the Old Testament. So next time you're reading, pay attention to that. I was a bit shocked when I began to pay attention. Abraham, for example, in Genesis 18 and verses 1 through 8 says, "Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth tree of Mamre, and as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day, so he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him, and when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground and said, 'My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Please let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh your hearts. After that, you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant.' They said, 'Do as you have said.' So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, 'Quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes.'" That's enough for about 300 people to have a biscuit. That's a lot. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, which, by the way, is a lot of food, and gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it, not some of it, but it. And so he took butter and milk and the calf, which he had prepared, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. Fellowship meal. Obviously, there's more food there, so probably for everybody that worked for Abraham. Fancy meal for these 3, and yet it was also for the people that worked for him likely. David, Psalm 23 verse 5, in the psalm that we all know, mentioned this concept of even eating together. "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup runs over." Meals all over the place. In fact, there are 10 that the Jews observe. There's the Feast of Purim, the Feast of the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of First Fruits, the Feast of Pentecost, the Feast of the Sabbath, which, by the way, all these, the Sabbath one, you obviously have to prepare it the day before. It's a whole different way of eating than we observe here. 7, it's the Feast of Trumpets. 8, it's the Feast of the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles, and the Feast of Lights, or Hanukkah. Keegan and I have been talking about this. It's something that I've wanted to do forever. So I've just never been able to pull it off. I've mentioned it to elders before, but it's kind of different, and so something I would really like to do. I'd really like to do it next year. I don't know if we'd be able to do it. I don't know if finances situation allows. I would love for us to get a flavor of what it's like to be Jewish, our heritage, to the point that we could have like a feast that parallels each of these at least have a pittance of an observance of understanding what they ate, what it's like, and be able to sit down to that. Wouldn't that be interesting to you? I thought it would be too. And I think it would be something that you would remember forever. And if we had all 10 of them in a year, that would be kind of a good memory thing, right? And it'd give you some history behind it. I don't know if we can pull that off, but I think it would be a cool thing if we ever were able to do it. Meals with Jesus means, though, fellowship, obviously, right? That's the idea. So eating together is like being in a covenant of peace together. In fact, you know that even from some of the meals in the scriptures, like Abraham walking between the parts of the animals that he cut in two, it's like a covenant. Eating together is also, for want of another way of saying it, it's life. It's life, and it's life-giving. We have to eat. It is essential that we eat. And eating together makes that kind of a neat thing. We are surviving together. And eating together is family. And it's love, because who eats together more but family? So when a church eats together, it's like saying, we're family. And eating together is comforting. And it gives room for open dialogue. And I think that we need that. I think you are more relaxed and more able to actually have a conversation with somebody when you're eating than when you're just talking to someone in the hall or on your way, or even when you sit beside them in the pew or chairs, as the case may be. And so literally, I think it's comforting because we feel better, well, usually, after we get through eating together. And eating together is how relationships are truly established. I mean, there's no such thing, at least in modern times, of a man and woman getting together in marriage without having and eating a meal together. You know what I mean? That's kind of dating thing. That's the thing you do. Eating together is how we deepen our relationships and all of our connections. People who don't eat together aren't all that connected. I guarantee that the majority of the people that are here tonight go to our fellowship meals. But Sunday morning, I don't know if I could make that argument as firmly. But I do know that the Sunday night crowd is. Eating together is how we enjoy life together with our fellow man and with God, because we give thanks to God for every time we eat. Fellowship meals represent church life. It's not to be taken lightly. We're having these shepherd's flocks. You need to take advantage of them. They're not being offered lightly. There's a real connection and real love that happens when we sit right next to each other and eat food together. Acts 2, verse 46, from the very beginning of the church, it says, continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart. So it's always been a part of the church. I know some would think, oh, that's not that important in the church. In AD 48, Galatians 2 was written, or at least this is when this event is believed to happen. In Galatians chapter 2, it says, when Peter had come to Antioch, verse 12, before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who are the circumcision. Here's the only point I want to make of that. The church was eating together. You can't miss that point. That's what was happening. In whatever day that was, it doesn't matter. They were eating together. Let me walk you through how important eating was the way it's talked about in the New Testament. Fellowship meals were clearly going to always be important within the church based upon the history and based upon foods alone. In AD 29, Mark, we believe, is talking about what happened here. In AD 29, Mark 7 and verse 18, all foods, he's recording, not that Mark wrote it in AD 29, but he's recording when it happened, that Jesus made all foods clean. That's a big change. Why was that important? AD 40 in Acts chapter 10, verses 13 and 16, all foods and all people are now declared clean. Critical understanding. Why is that important? Well, we need to understand that all people are clean before God. Anybody can be saved, but there's more to it than that.
In AD 49, Acts 15 begins to unveil why that's important. In Acts 15, verse 29, for expediency's sake, you remember I taught on this just a few weeks ago, for expediency's sake, some foods should be avoided, but not because they were forbidden under Christ, but because they had been forbidden by the Jews. And if we're going to eat together, they needed to be expedient about it. So that's the reason that's discussed. By AD 53 and 54, 1 Corinthians 10, 23 through 33 are talked about, and it says that we should avoid giving offense to people as we eat with them. Eating together, when you have rules about how you're to eat together, don't tell me eating together is not important. So we even have rules about it. I mean, you can't do this, you must do that, right? That's what we just did. 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 11, keeping company with anyone named a brother, you're not to eat with them if they're being disfellowshipped. So obviously, it was so common that they ate together as brethren, you had to command them not to eat together whenever they were being disfellowshipped. And then Jude 1 in verse 12 uses this term, in your love feast while they feast with you. The early church ate together. It ate together from the very beginning. It ate together all the time. We are to eat together. This is not a casual thing where you can say, well, I just really don't like fellowship meals. Get over your not liking fellowship meals and go, because it is important. Every meal with Jesus in the New Testament does two things, or one of two things. Either a miracle happens at that meal, or a miraculous teaching takes place. And so let's look at a few of those. We're only going to look at 10. 10! Oh, that's all that I just covered. Sorry, didn't get to that. Here we go. That's everything. You've got it right there. A meal with Jesus and the married. John chapter 2, 1 through 11. He multiplies, if you will, the wine, which basically was a gift to the couple, because now it was enough for, as I understand it, about $25,000 worth of wine on our scale today. That's a pretty good gift, by the way. It's a wedding. And here's the thing. What's the significance of going to a wedding and eating together? If you don't know, I don't know how I can share it with you. Folks, if somebody's in a wedding and they invite you, you should go. It is critical to the binding of that relationship and the binding of your relationship with them. And a miracle happened at that wedding. That's interesting, isn't it? First miracle. Why there? A meal with Jesus and the mongrels. That's what I like to call them, because they're the Samaritans. In the Samaritans, in John 4, verse 32, Jesus didn't eat food. There's a meal that takes place without eating food. You're having it right now. When we eat the Scriptures, you're having a meal without food, right? He says, I have food to eat you don't know anything about, in John 4, verse 32. So he was eating with the Samaritans. That's right. The very thing that they would not want anybody to do. He was eating spiritual food with Samaritans. There's a message in that of inclusion, right, that we need to learn. The third lesson I want you to see, or the third meal, is a meal with Jesus and the mother-in-law of Peter. The mother-in-law of Peter. Jesus has been out teaching. It's been a great day, and there's been healing out there. And then they come back to Peter's house, and his mother-in-law is obviously living with him. Did you get that? His mother-in-law was living with him. Did you get that, Ben? His mother-in-law was living with him. Anyway, so his mother-in-law was living with him. Important lesson, I think. In Matthew chapter 8, verses 14 and 15, his mother-in-law had a fever, and Jesus lays his hands on her, and she arises, and she fixes food for them. Well, that's not the end of the day. People then gather around outside the house, and he heals everybody that comes up around the house. So there was a miracle again that day. Right there, his mother-in-law was healed, and then all these others, and she fixed food for them. so they could keep going. A meal with Jesus and the multitudes, the bread and the fishes, right? We all know the stories. There's two stories. They're great stories. In Matthew 16, 9, and 10, it just mentions the two. That's the reason I use that passage. There's the 5 loaves and the 5,000, or the 7 loaves and the 4,000, right? And how many baskets were left over afterwards. So there's a message there, several messages. Well, the one is God can do anything. He can multiply whatever your needs are. That's an obvious message. But one of the major messages is that there's enough left over. Don't worry. God not only can take care of your need, make sure you eat, but there'll be food left over. I bet y'all have got stuff in your cupboards, right? I bet you do. I bet you got enough that you could probably last a week without going to the grocery store. Maybe a month. I bet you do. And then number 5, a meal with Jesus and the Marthas. We all know about Mary. Well, Mary's listening, but Martha's busy cooking, getting it ready, right? It's at Martha's house this time. In Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42, she wasn't listening, she was preparing. Now, is that wrong? No, that's not wrong. If that's what you need to do, that's not wrong. But don't get mad at somebody who is listening, okay? Sometimes that's the best lesson we could ever get. Conviction was happening to Mary. I don't know exactly all that was going on with Mary, but Mary needed convicting. She needed to listen. That was important to her. But how many Marthas are there at our fellowship meals? I love those Marthas. If it wasn't for Marthas, we wouldn't have fellowship meals. That's the honest truth. Amen? That's the truth. Number 6, a meal with Jesus and the miser. Yes, he goes over to a miser's house. His name's Zacchaeus. He's a little guy, climbs up in a sycamore tree to even see Jesus coming by. But in Luke chapter 19, 1 through 10, the best part about this is that apparently, just for Jesus coming, I don't know what Jesus said. I don't know what happened at that meal. I've got nothing. But I know toward the end of that meal what happened. He says, I'm going to give half of what I have to the poor. You going to do that? He had been stealing from people apparently. He said, I'm going to give half of what I have to the poor. I'm going to fix this. And anybody that I have messed around, I'm going to return that fourfold. And Jesus says, salvation's come here. Right? Sometimes you need a meal with Jesus so you can stop being a miser and start being a good person to the people around you. Need a meal with Jesus. A meal with Jesus and the Marys, though. And that's in John chapter 12, 1 through 7 particularly. And that is Lazarus at the meal. Jesus is being honored at the meal. Lazarus being honored at the meal. And Mary realizes what this man really is about, that he's not normal. And she's so convicted, she comes in and washes his feet with this ointment that she has, and cries and washes his feet with her tears. A true conversion takes place. A great message takes place because she had prepared him for his burial. They didn't believe he was about to die. They didn't understand that. I'm fixing to die, and she's preparing me for my burial. That's the Marys. There's a meal with Jesus and the malicious. Judas was at that meal. In John chapter 13, 21 through 30, this is the Passover meal. This is the meal where the Lord's Supper is instituted. This is the meal that we remember every week when we take bread and the fruit of the vine. And in that meal, there's a fellow there named Judas Iscariot who is going to create the situation that leads to Jesus' crucifixion. He does it to him, sells him out. He's sent out, he goes out because Jesus knows what he's going to do. He says, I need you to do it quickly. I don't blame him. If I was facing this, don't you want it over as fast as you could get it? If I could get it over in less than 12 hours, I would. If I could get it over in less than 6 hours, I would. If I could get it over in 30 minutes, I would. And if I was Jesus facing this, I'd say, get it done fast. Get it over with. He sends him out. Everybody thought he's gone to buy bread, but he's gone out to betray him. And then there's a meal with Jesus and the militia. In John 21, verses 12 through 19, the real soldiers of Christ were left. There was only a handful left at that point, and they we're still struggling. This is the third appearance of Jesus after his resurrection. And now, I don't know about you, but if I saw Jesus one time after the resurrection, I might think I saw something. I might think, well, I was just a little goofy. If I saw him 2 times, I'd be like, I don't know, maybe I did see the resurrected Jesus. But if I saw him 3 times, and the 3rd time he is cooking breakfast for me, which is what he did. He cooked them breakfast. That was the meal they had. And I'm doing it for the guys that are really going out there. They're the true soldiers of Christ, and I need to prepare them for what's ahead. And he prepares Peter with, Peter, do you love me more than these? Do you? After he denied him 3 times. Do you love me? Do you love me, Peter? And a meal with Jesus and the manumet. What is that? That means to set free, to release from slavery. All of us who've been released. When does that take place? That's in heaven, my friend. There is a meal. I'm sorry, I believe in a resurrected body. I don't understand what I'm fixing to say, but I believe that this body will rise from the dead. You say, this body, yes. Tangible, yes, tangible. Capable of eating, yes, just like Jesus, capable of eating. Needing to eat? I don't know about that, but capable of eating. And there's going to be a meal, yes. There's going to be a marriage supper of the Lamb. And all of us who've been set free from our sin and all the guilt and all the shame of all the things we did before are invited to that meal. We go to the meal as the bride of Christ. The bride walks in not as one of the guests that's just somebody there. We're the honored ones at the guest. It isn't the angels, it's us that are the honored ones. I could keep seeing it. There's this banner overhead, welcome home. And we sit down to tables that go as far as the eye can see. Tables, chairs, food. I believe it's real food. I believe it's I hope it's chicken. Marriage supper of the Lamb, but for all I know, it'll be lamb. I don't know. But the idea of celebrating, we're finally home. I believe that celebration will really happen. Now, I may not know the details like I just said, but I believe that's coming. Meals with Jesus. That's 10 stories. And that's not nearly all the stories, but they speak to a place within us, doesn't it? Something within. One of the reasons we like Thanksgiving, isn't it? It's the food and the fellowship. Is it really that we spend the whole day doing nothing but praying and thanking the Lord for every little thing that happens in our life? No, it's the meals and the fellowship of the family. Every meal with Jesus is either a miracle or a miraculous message. Every one of them. Food, and here's the connection, listen to this. Food caused the curse that fell on us all. Why would it not just be the right thing to do when the curse is lifted for us to bind together with food? Why would it not be the Lord's Supper? Why would it not be the marriage supper of the Lamb? Food that had caused the curse is best given when the curse is lifted. Gloria and Bill Gaither wrote, "These are they." And there's one little section in it. I want to read this to you. I know you'd like me to sing it, right? Sing it? Yeah? Oh, yeah. I'll hold it. The oceans give up all the dead that are in them. The graves open wide to set captives free. And those who are roaming the earth rise to meet them. Abraham's seed as the sands of the sea. These are they who've come out of great tribulation. They've washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. They have gone through much sorrow into great jubilation. They're redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Like a strong and mighty army, their voices all ringing. The great cloud of witnesses sings freedom's song as they enter the country built by their own Father, the promised homeland they've looked for so long. And all the pilgrims and all the strangers, they will no longer be strangers. All the tired and the weary wanderers, they will wander no more. The table is spread for the great celebration, and the welcome home banner flies over the door. These are they who have come out of great tribulation. They have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. They've gone through much sorrow into great jubilation. They're redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Hebrews 13 verse 10 says, we have a table to eat of. Those don't have a right to. If you want to partake of the table that we partake of, then you too must become one of us, bought, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Repent of your sins. Confess your faith that you believe Jesus Christ is the risen Lord, and be baptized. And you will be invited to the final great celebration. Meals with Jesus. I don't think that'll be the last one. But I want to be a part of that, don't you?